Hello, my friends. Today, I want to talk about what happens when you're always waking up with chronic fear and chronic anxiety, how to overcome it. Okay, because the truth is that if you've undergone trauma, if you've undergone childhood trauma, if you've undergone long-term chronic stress and trauma, it creates patterns in your body. And I know with myself, there was a time when I thought, well, once the outside changed, right? Doesn't that mean all these patterns go away? And it didn't. And so I had to learn how to change these patterns in my body. So that being said, I wanted to focus on waking up with chronic anxiety and chronic fear. Let's say in childhood, you had a life that was unsafe, right? Your feelings weren't safe. You never knew what was going to happen. You never knew when your parent was going to explode. You never had any kind of consistency in your life. That creates a lot of anxiety in a child, right? And let's say every time you woke up, your life was really stressful from the second you woke up. Like if you had an anxiety-ridden parent and they're rushing, by the way, is a sign of trauma loops, right? Is rushing. We don't tend to think that that can be a sign of trauma, but the fact that we always feel like we have to be rushing can be. So if you had a parent that was like that and they're rushing all the time and you wake up and they're rushing you to school and everything is rushed and you never have a second to relax. You might think that, okay, I left home and now I can wake up in peace. And it doesn't happen. Like you wake up with that anxiety at a, not even a 10, at a 20. It's interesting to know that when we wake up naturally, whether we've been through trauma or not, our cortisol levels are at the highest at that moment, and they're supposed to slowly decline. But when you've been through trauma, you wake up with your cortisol levels at its highest, and then it just continues to rise instead of decline because of the trauma loops that tend to happen. And again, these are the patterns that don't go away just because the people in your life change. So let's say that was a cycle of yours from childhood. You wake up, stress, anxiety, fear, right? And that's been your pattern. And now you want to change it. So what tends to happen is you wake up and you feel the anxiety in your body because your body has memorized that pattern. So it's not really because there's a reason to have the anxiety as much as it is that your body is in a pattern. It is in a loop. It's in a trauma loop. Wake up, anxiety in the body. Our brain is a meaning-making machine. It wants to always make meaning out of things. So it's like, oh, there's anxiety. Why am I feeling that? Oh, because. And it will go down a long, long, long list of reasons as to why this is happening. Oh, it's because this happened and because my whole life this, and I've never been able to do this. And no matter how hard I tried this. And one time when I really tried, this happened and this bad thing happened. So now your brain is feeding the anxiety in the body, and the anxiety in the body increases. Now the brain and the body are just spinning on that trauma loop together. If we do nothing, that trauma loop will carry out every day for the rest of our lives, even if we never, ever are around a toxic person again. The pattern is there. It's kind of like a dent in a car, right? Somebody dents your car. You can drive around no matter how far you go. You can ship the car to another continent. The dent is still going to be there. So the dent or the pattern in your nervous system is still there until you change it. And that's really what I want to focus on, because you can change it. Now, it is challenging and it doesn't happen overnight. I want to kind of throw this out there because I think what happens is people will learn something, they don't see immediate results, so they give up. But the reason they don't see immediate results is because when you are working through default settings, right? The thoughts that come up without you trying, they're on default. They're part of your unconscious and they're coming from your subconscious mind. The feelings that come up in your body, not because you want them there, because they just happen, They're on default and come from your subconscious mind. So when you're working on subconscious material, your subconscious mind and your conscious mind learn differently. Your conscious mind can learn like that. It's like, oh, that's what happened. That's what I have to do. Got it. Check. Your subconscious is like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. In fact, the reality is your subconscious mind does not learn cognitively. It doesn't learn because you're like, oh, I'm safe now. My logical mind says I'm safe. There's no abuser. There's no person here that is harming me. Therefore, I'm safe and I'm now going to feel safe. Logically, you can say that, but your body's like, oh, that sounds nice. Good for you. But what happens is your body wakes up in the pattern and it believes the feelings in your body more than it believes the words you say. Okay. That being said, I want to give you some tips. These tips really work, but you have to be willing to do them consistently. And it doesn't mean that you can never skip a day. You know, sometimes that happens. What it does mean is that when you notice that you've stopped doing some of these exercises, don't beat yourself. Don't get mad at yourself and think you need to find something else and something new. No, just dust yourself off and start again. Okay. So the first thing, I'm going to share some things that were really helpful for me. When I first would wake up in the morning, in fact, when I got remarried, my husband told me something that I didn't know about myself. He's like, Michelle, when you sleep, he's like, sometimes I've tried to match my breathing with yours. He goes, but when you sleep, it's like you're running a marathon. He said, your breathing is so fast and you're asleep. Okay, so we might be asleep, but our subconscious mind is awake. And if the subconscious mind is stuck in loops of anxiety and fear, well, it's going to be happening while we sleep. And that's why we feel it in the morning. So one of the things I started to do before I would go to sleep and as soon as I would wake up is just, and honestly, this takes like 10 seconds, not 10 seconds. And honestly, this takes maybe a minute. Okay, I would just do a few diaphragmatic breaths. Diaphragmatic breathing, especially when you're laying down, it's easier to make sure you're doing it correctly. What you want to do is make sure that your chest is not rising when you inhale. You just want your belly to expand. And it takes a little bit of mind-body connection. When you've been through a lot of stress, you are so unconsciously a chest breather, you don't even realize it. So when I started to try to do diaphragmatic breathing, I remember being like, are you serious? Like, I can't breathe. Why I have to teach myself to breathe? It seemed ridiculous, but I had to teach myself to change my breath. So 1 minute of diaphragmatic breathing at night, 1 minute of diaphragmatic breathing in the morning. And what that does is it's the brake on your nervous system. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing that I found really helpful, and again, these are things that you can do before you even get out of bed. Okay, so for anyone that's like, oh, I don't have time to do anything else, this could be a 3-minute exercise. The second thing I did was ask myself, what emotion am I feeling? And I would just say, like, what is automatically in my body right now? Oh, shoot, I'm feeling anxiety. I would name it to tame it. Okay, instead of trying to not feel what obviously is there in my body, I named it. And when we name our emotions, they chill out a little bit. They relax just a little bit. So I was like, oh, that's anxiety. And then I validated it. Well, of course I have this anxiety. I was never allowed to sleep. I was woken up all the time. I had sleep deprivation. I was constantly exhausted by being exploited and doing so much. My mornings were so full of stress because I had da, 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 da. In other words, I was validating all the reasons in the past. I mean, you don't got to go through every single one. You could just validate a couple of reasons, right? Of course, I'm anxious in the morning because this used to happen and that used to happen. Well, that makes sense. So the point of the validation is to not get tossed into story where your brain just takes off about staring at the other person. It's about normalizing what you went through. And then the last step that I would do when I was asking myself these questions. So question number 1 is, what am I feeling? Step number 2 is validate and normalize. Step number 3 is give my brain a choice. I would say, if I could choose, if. Now, this is so important because our subconscious programs are like a freight train. They're going so fast. And if we just want to stop it and change the direction, it's never going to happen. But a train is going down the tracks and then it gets to that Y, right? That split. And one little flick of the lever and the train doesn't have to slow down. It doesn't have to stop. It doesn't have to do any crazy screeching of the brakes. It just literally changes direction. When you use the words, when you ask yourself, if I could choose, what would I want to feel? You're providing your brain that easy choice. You're not trying to force it. You're not trying to shove it in the opposite direction. You are giving it a choice. And let's say the emotion I want to feel is passion. I want to be excited. I want to be excited for my day. Like, I'm alive. I want to be excited. The last thing I would do is say, if I was excited, what would I be thinking and what would I be doing? And then I would go and do and think it. Okay. Done every day, you start retraining yourself to love your mornings. Now, I'm not going to lie, when I first learned these steps, I wasn't like, oh, yes, this is so great, I'm going to do this. It didn't happen that way. I had resistance. The biggest resistance is, oh, that's not going to work. Nah, that's not for me. That's too easy. I need something else. The other thing that got in the way was patience. We live in a society where everything is instant gratification. And if we don't see results immediately, we're like, oh, that didn't work. Next, that didn't work. Next. But the truth is that the subconscious mind is a habit mind. It does not learn like that. So it's about just being consistent, being patient, being compassionate. And what you will find is you'll look back and be like, oh my goodness, my mornings are so different. That fear and that anxiety is so different. I challenge you. Try it for 21 days. 21 days. Honestly, the tips I gave in this video would take less than 5 minutes. Give yourself these 5 minutes to rewire, to retrain your body, your nervous system, your thought patterns, to break out of those trauma loops. You won't regret it. And for anyone that's still struggling, that would like more personalized assistance, make sure you check out my website, because I have resources for people that want more help for themselves. And I also have resources for people that have done a lot of work and want to now help others. There's also some free resources that you could find there as well.